And one thing they mentioned was about Namor's flying. People liked seeing it. That's kind of one of those things in the movie.
It's like a Superman moment, yeah.
Yeah, Marvel knows that people want to see him fly with his wings on his ankles, right? But they mentioned that they did a simulation in Maya with him on top of a helicopter, which could do certain darting kind of moves. And I thought, oh, that's cool. And then in the bake-off reel, there's the simulation of Namor on the helicopter. I'm like, oh my God, that's so cool. So I hope that gets released widely somehow.
Welcome to the VFX Notes podcast. Today's episode is sponsored by Action VFX and ftrack. Action VFX has the best library of VFX stock footage, with over 5,500 high-quality elements. They are the best stock footage I ever come across, and I highly recommend them. And the new free for subscribers features allows you to instantly unlock over 1,000 free bonus assets for only $29 a month. Sign up at actionvfx.com today and start downloading. This podcast is also sponsored by ftrack. ftrack Review is the all-in-one collaborative workspace where you and your team can give and receive interactive feedback on projects in real time. Forget endless email threads, comments on the wrong version, or constant video calls. ftrack Review replaces all of that with a seamless back and forth. Simply add your media, share your link, and you and your teammates and clients can review from anywhere in the world in real-time, frame-accurate sync. You can also scale up to full production management with ftrack Studio. Start your free trial today at ftrack.com. And now on to the show.
Hi everyone, welcome to the latest VFX Notes podcast. I'm Ian Fales from Befores and Afters, and as always, I'm joined by Hugo Guerra from Hugo's Desk. Hi Hugo.
Hey Ian, how are you doing? How's everything going?
It's really good. I'm in a new set, but it's still my office down under in Australia. It's a little bit moody at the moment while I sort out the right lighting for a podcast. And so maybe next time I'll start pointing out some of the things that are behind me, but there's some fun things I've collected over the years. But finally, I'm showing off some of my speed stuff, which I've always promised to do for this podcast, right?
Only took a year. That's fine.
Sorry.
Only took a year. But yeah, I can see some cool stuff down behind you. You look good, man. It looks good. It's moody. It's nice. It's pretty. I like it. I like it a lot.
You look like you're ready to go underwater again, which just so happens to be the theme of this movie we're discussing, Wakanda Forever.
Yeah, I am actually underwater right now. I'm doing this film inside a big pool of water. I know, it's a bit weird, isn't it? We've done 2 water-based films in a row.
Yeah.
For some reason, I guess, what's the next one? It's going to be underwater as well. No, but
Something's
yeah, I'm here.
Underwater.
Yeah, exactly. I'm here at Hugo's Desk. It's all very, very moody and blue. Everything is blue. Very lack of reds everywhere. That's the idea today.
Awesome. Well, before we get into this VFX Oscar nominated film, let's do what we always do and give a shout out to our sponsors, to our Patreon supporters, and also all those amazing people who like and subscribe us on YouTube and on other podcast platforms. Thank you for doing that. We really couldn't do this without you. We love your suggestions. We love chatting to you, especially on YouTube. Hugo is an expert at it. I'm still getting better at it. But Hugo, I mean, big shout out to them, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It's amazing. We always get so many nice comments, and no, I can't thank everyone enough. It really drives the force to do the show, and we're so happy. And to our Patreons, to our sponsors, all of them. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And if you're a Patreon supporter, just a note, you actually get early access to this podcast via the Patreon. So you get to hear it before everyone else. That's a little perk for our supporters.
Yep.
Okay, Hugo, Black Panther, Wakanda Forever. I need to know what you thought about it. Come on, let's dive in, literally.
Okay. So here's the thing. I've watched the film 3 times now because I wanted to be sure.
Oh my gosh.
So I first watched the film in IMAX. The film isn't really shot in IMAX, but it's formatted for IMAX. That's the thing now. So it was nice to watch it in IMAX. And then I watched it twice by the amazing digital screener that we got from the Visual Effects Society. And so I'll tell you, it's a bit conflict. I made a list because it's short, don't worry. I made a list of pros and cons because first time I watched it, really didn't like the film. Second time I watched it, was kind of like a bit lukewarm to it. Enjoyed it a bit better the first time. And the reason I wanted to say this is because for me, I think this film is really strange. It has like two sides. For me, like the first 30 to 45 minutes of the film were brutal, really good. I love them. It's so depressing, the whole thing with the funeral and the longing and the mourning and all of that. Even the logo of the Marvel montage is amazing as well. The whole first 45 minutes is really strong. It's an amazing drama film. And I kind of fooled me. I thought, oh man, is this the time we're going to get a proper drama from Marvel? Is it going to be a proper, like a film, like a normal drama film? But then the entire middle is just these really outlandish, really out of character battles that are so strange compared to the rest. And then the end is very poignant again. The end is amazing. Like the last 10 minutes, again, very powerful. Even made me cry a little bit on the cinema when I was watching it. Right. So for me, it's like this film that is really powerful about loss, about heartfelt. And in the middle, these two fights don't really fly with me.
Right.
Having said that, above all, I think I really love Namor. I think Namor is a fantastic character. I really like... This is also because when I was young, I loved the Submariner. He's called Submariner in the cartoons. And I used to read his comics all the time. I love this character. It's very different, though, like the one that we have seen now. It's not exactly the same. It's a fantastic performance from Tenoch Huerta. He's really shines. I feel like he's the best thing of this film. I love this conflict, that he's a nice guy, but he's also a villain, but he's also not a villain. He's trying to defend his people. That presentation of the Aztecs from the 16th century is amazing. It's a really good piece of the film. So I'm conflicted, man, because the film, I think, really fell short on those sequences, and the film is really bad sometimes and really good sometimes, and I can't understand why it's so split.
Right.
But what do you think?
Let's dissect that a bit. I'll give you my take on it quickly, and then I'll give you a few points that I think are the reason why it's not hitting home for you, and for me sometimes as well.
Yeah.
The first thing to say is, of course, the first film was very successful, and Chadwick Boseman's performance was fantastic in the first one. Now, I did like the first one, except it fell into the classic Marvel thing of I always feel the first two acts of the film are brilliant and set up something fantastic. And then every Marvel film has a huge fight in its third act climax. And it just is what it is. The one in Black Panther was a little bit weak, I thought. Every other confrontation in the first film was great.
Yeah.
This film, as you say, Hugo, kind of has two big confrontations against the same parties. And, the third act is there to try and be really, really super exciting. Yet, I think emotionally, it doesn't have that usual payoff because, well, it just doesn't. And we'll get to that a little bit.
No.
Partly because I don't know if the new Black Panther is as emotional as having Chadwick as the Black Panther.
Yeah.
Now, what I think is great about this film is the acting. I actually think some of the acting is really, really great. As you say, Namor, I think, I actually think all the actors do a great job. Yeah. And they're stepping into a tricky role, seeing as Chadwick, of course, passed away. And so, they had to take on really the weight of the film in some ways. Why I think it doesn't work sometimes, Hugo, is structure is one thing, there seems to be two big climaxes. They're hard to resolve. The other is actually the making of the film, clearly made during COVID. Mm-hmm. That's always a challenge for shooting, post, all the things that people know are tricky during... people in visual effects know have been tricky. And then, of course, Letitia Wright got an injury, and I think the film was shut down for a short time.
Yeah.
And all those things, you just feel like affected the flow of the film, is what I would say. And there's one other thing that I just not sure I ever quite like thought was great, which is the addition of this character, Riri. Yeah. Have I pronounced that name incorrectly?
I think it's correct. No, I think it's correct.
Yeah, and it's this MIT student, and because she has an Iron Man suit, and because she can do these things, it sort of feels like they're compelled to show those sequences and her flying and doing things, and it just felt a bit away from the actual real emotional heart of the film. So that's my take on it. Partly it's story issues, and partly it's shooting the film must have been a real challenge.
I completely agree with you. That's why I was saying about the 45 minutes. Exactly the 45 minutes mark is when this new Iron Man suit comes in with the student, and that fight with the music going like a music video, the bridge sequence. That entire thing is just off tone for me at what I've seen so far. Let me give you an example. The first moment we see the Telecon, it's really scary. They come into the sea, they start singing, and then the people start dropping from the ship. That sequence is like Shalaman, it's almost like reminds me of The Happening, of people getting hypnotized and killing themselves. That is a scary scene. It's a powerful scene. Then they show up, they kill everyone on board. You never really know what's going on there. We see like a silhouette of someone destroying the helicopter. What the hell is happening? It's almost like a horror film. It's a fantastic intro, an amazing intro. And right after the funeral, it had a really good tone. And then we go to this new character, and then the Iron Man suit, and then the hip-hop music going, the music video vibes, and then the car and the bridge. Come on, man. It's just too easy. And I felt it did a disservice to the film. It just went always up and down, up and down. It's like, for example, in the middle of the film, when Bassett dies, when the Queen of Wakanda dies, it's also a very powerful part as well. So it's like the film kind of gets there, but then it goes back again. It's weird, man. I don't know. Yeah. I feel the editing is really what is a big problem, I guess, here. But I mean, I don't know. Marvel films are sometimes by committee. It could be tricky to do something like this.
Yeah, and just to be clear, some of those points, even I've made or you've made about, say, the bridge sequence, I think the story point is tricky. I think it looks great.
Oh, no, it looks amazing.
Effects, and we'll get to that.
Yeah, it looks amazing. I'm not saying that. I think,
Yeah. I wonder also... Okay, Hugo. Here we go. Somehow, during the marketing of this film, and I actually personally believe it wasn't ever Marvel's intention to do this, that they really kept back who the new Black Panther was going to be.
Yeah.
Right? Like, that it might not be Shuri. And I thought, I reckon it was always going to be Shuri, right? Like,
I know exactly what you mean.
And then somehow, in the very late stages of marketing of this film, and of course, I could be completely wrong, and it was absolutely the whole goal of promoting the film, they really, tried to make this mystery about who would it be. There's a few options, and of course, Shuri was the main one. And so when she does become the Black Panther, it's sort of not as impactful because there's been all this discussion about it. Yet I thought they were trying to make it impactful.
Yeah.
That was one takeaway from just watching the film. I'm also going to say, Hugo, that end spoiler about Chadwick's son, I also feel like Marvel intended that to be a huge revelation. And like something like, oh my god, and people's mouths opening, like dropping. And I'm just not sure I felt it. Now, you mentioned it was quite emotional for you, that sort of end.
Oh,
last 10 minutes.
Not that part. No, not the kid. No, I every time we saw Shadman on the film, it was very hard for me to see the film. I think it's because, yes, you're right, because the first one is so powerful. He's such a good actor, not just on Wakanda, on Black Panther. He's amazing. It was so sad to see him die so young and to see him suffer with cancer even during the shoot. You know, he was diagnosed in 2016. That meant that he filmed all the Avengers and all Black Panther with cancer, with treatments. And it's so sad and so unfortunate that he died so young. And so it drives me with sadness. And obviously I think the filmmakers made really good justice there. Like they've managed to do a really good homage there. But for me, the moment it is really fun is the beginning. When, you know, it makes me cry a little bit. And then in the end, when she's like burning the white robe and she's thinking about him, you see him again. When you see him, that hits really hard. When you see that little footage of him hugging her, and that is powerful. That's where I cried. The kid, yeah, I couldn't care less. You're right.
It's not.
I'm sorry. No,
but
I felt like that. I couldn't like.
That was meant to be the big, you know, I don't know what they call them now. Not spoilers, but like big, you know, twist or something. So yeah.
But you know, we don't want, you know, I always tell to everyone, like, I don't like to be too negative on this podcast. I feel like negativity on YouTube is already too big. There's no point of us here. We don't hate the film. We're just like putting up a few things that we didn't enjoy. I also must say that it's fair to say that Ryan Coogler, I'm sure it was so difficult for him and for the writers. Imagine, you know, he dies. What the hell are they going to do? Like, it's like, it's so tricky. I'm sure they thought, oh, maybe we do a digital version. Then they thought, oh, maybe that's not good. Maybe let's do some of the story with someone else. Maybe let's not have him. Maybe let's replace him. It was probably so difficult to drop the story they had because they already had another story, and then just completely drop that and make something completely fresh and new with the homage to him. I mean, I need to give a round of applause. At least he made it in a I mean, the homage is beautiful. It's a great send-off to him. Yes, the film has problems, but I don't know if anyone could have done it any better. I mean, how do you solve this problem?
It occurs to me that part of what we're talking about, at least from my point of view, Hugo, is that when I watch this in the cinema, as I do with every Marvel film, I was into it. I was like, this is... You know, I love being in the cinema for Marvel films. All it is I want these Marvel films to ascend as much as I feel like some of the others have. Yeah. And when this just didn't hang together as well as I thought it might or should, that's what I'm talking about. But you're right. It was a great ode to Chadwick, and I mean, is a fun ride for a Marvel film, which is also the point of Marvel films. So it's for me, like, I completely get during COVID, during all these problems with Chadman dying, it was so difficult to be creative and to construct something else. But I feel like it's a missed opportunity for sure. Like I was explaining, this could have been a dramatic Marvel like movie, like a mature movie. And I think if they would have stick their guns and not have so many fights and so many flying cameras, for God's sake, and so many weird stuff going on these fights and so many random edit cuts on these fights and so many characters, we could have just had one fight. Maybe it could have been much more simpler. I felt like the film could have breathed as well. And 2 hours and 45 minutes is a bit of a stretch, to be honest. I felt the film is too long. Film could have been easily 2 hours. I don't know. Like I feel like I feel like it's a missed opportunity because this film, the original Black Panther was originally nominated for Best Picture, and I understand why it was because it was very powerful. This didn't. This one did not get nominated, and I know why, because it fell short. The editing and
it doesn't stick its landing. Although it got nominated for 5 Oscars, which is amazing, and got nominated for Angela Bassett. I'm sure she's probably going to win original song, makeup, custom design, and visual effects. It's an incredible achievement for a Marvel movie. 5 nominations. They can stick it on the poster now. And it's really important, but it could have been so much more. And I feel like, oh man, it's a shame. Real shame. But,
Yes. I think I'm in agreement with you. I reckon... Now, we just go back a little bit, Hugo, to this film called Eternals, where after one viewing, I wasn't sure about the film. After 2 viewings, I'm like, this is a masterpiece.
Yeah.
I'm kind of convinced that I'll watch Wakanda Forever again, and I'll go, oh, that's it. That's what I'm missing.
I don't know, man.
And I think what I will do is watch the Namor scenes and just think, wow, I could have watched a whole movie with just those, because they were kind of edgy and a bit dark. And I'm
sure they're making a film about him or a TV show because he's an amazing character.
Yeah, so I really responded to that. But
I
yes,
understand what you mean about Eternals. But you see, Eternals, I also watched it 3 times, and I got that exact feeling. It's a masterpiece. I've now watched this 3 times. It's not a masterpiece. It's not Eternals. And I feel like Eternals is a very underrated film and a very misunderstood film for sure. I think it's much better than everyone gives it credit to. It's probably the most dramatic and most serious Marvel movie, although it has fights as well, but it has fights in a different way. They look different. And I feel like this does not look different. This just looks like a run-of-the-mill factory Marvel, it's which I feel it's a shame. But anyway, I'm going to shut up now. Let's continue.
All right. Well, let's talk about the visual effects. And the first thing maybe to talk about is the fact that this is VFX Oscar nominated.
Yeah.
Now, I think it's really hard to pick the 5 films. If you're in the VFX branch of the Academy, that's hard. Yep. If you're an observer like we are, it's of course also hard. I'm going to say, Hugo, that Wakanda Forever was not on my 5.
Yeah.
Until I went to the Bake Off.
Oh, I see.
And then Jeffrey Bauman's, who's the production VFX soup, Marvel VFX soup's presentation, and the reel they showed, and what they talked about, especially in terms of dry for wet and wet for wet shooting, it wowed the professional VFX crowd there. And reels don't always do that because people are in the industry, they know what's being done and what's going on. But I'm here to tell you, Hugo, that at certain points during the showing of the 3-minute befores and afters reel, people gasped and chuckled in a gleeful way that I came out after the Bake Off thinking that's going to be in the 5. And there it was. Having thought maybe, these Marvel films don't always get into consideration. So that was a very interesting turn of events.
Yeah, absolutely. It was not on my list either. Absolutely. It wasn't, because I watched the film and I thought, it looks okay. But, there's so many other things. But I know what you mean. I wasn't on the back off, so unfortunately I didn't have access to all those breakdowns. It's a shame. I would have loved to watch it. But I have seen one of them, which is mind-blowing, the one on the Visual Effects Society. For some, for some weird reason here, it was nominated for an Oscar, but on the Visual Effects Society, not so much. It wasn't nominated for almost anything. It was only nominated for one single award, and that was for best simulation on a photoreal feature. And that reel is amazing. The reel of the simulations. I didn't watch the other reels because I'm sure. This year, for the first time, I wasn't on the nominations jury panel. And I know they showed other things, and then it didn't got in. I'm sure all of them were amazing, but it was such a good, detailed show reel. So I completely get what you mean, because it wowed me. I looked at that simulation reel, and I was like, wow, this is almost giving Avatar a run for his money. It's a really good example of how they did these hydro bombs and how they did the water, and especially the integration with the sets and what they filmed for real. It's very impressive work. I'm getting ahead of myself, but I'm just saying I get that, but it's impressive work. But there's also some not so impressive work on the middle of it. But I feel like this is a this is a staple of Marvel, really, and to be honest, like Marvel always has this little slight uneven balance between things, and I feel like it's probably because they have so many companies working on the same film, you know.
Well, possibly, but more likely just, again, it's a COVID film where, you know, the industry was so tight and still is for so long. And also, it's a classic case of there's 2,000 or more visual effects shots. Some are always going to be amazing. Some are, you know, more rushed, or for whatever reason, as we always talk about.
No, I know, but you know, we've talked about this before. For me, like I know this is impossible for a film with 3,000 shots. I know it's difficult, but in my opinion, like when one single company handles the whole film, it usually tends to be more even. Like it tends to be. If you look at you know, Christopher Nolan's films, or even if you look at Avatar, and I know Avatar has more than one company, but the majority of it was Weta. You know, when you look at when one company takes the majority of the work, it tends to be a bit more even and a bit more connected. I felt a little bit disconnected on this film. Certain things looked slightly different between them. And fortunately, they were very far apart, so it wasn't as noticeable. And I think it's more noticeable now that I watched it 3 times, you know. But you know, I'm having a small gripe. The visual effects look amazing. I mean, I don't want to disrespect anyone that worked on the film. I think it looks amazing. But if you watch it a few times and you start pausing and zooming, there are a few things here and there that could have had more love. Maybe it's that problem that we always hear about in behind the scenes, where Marvel changes their mind all the time and they're always tweaking and tweaking and tweaking. I hear this all the time from people working in the industry. Maybe that's the issue, like, because that doesn't help when you're trying to do a shot. If you have to redo it to 100 times, it's probably going to be tricky to do it right, you know, so.
I can't speak to that. I mean, I know that that's the conversation that happens around Marvel films. I would say an interesting takeaway on this film, and maybe it happens on every film, is that the intention with the visual effects here and the visual effects team and the visual effects studios was to do a lot more stuff that felt grounded in reality. Now, I get told that in interviews all the time by VFX soups. But there actually did seem to be something here about what was shot in terms of underwater footage, or the stunt action, or even that attack on Wakanda City, where they really did use real water and, you know, even a lot of practical effects. It really felt like a lot of it was set up to look a lot more realistic in terms of practical, real stuff, and sort of have that proper underwater feel. Now, by the time it goes through the pipe and you're making these shots more exciting and maybe more frenetic, like sometimes in the mix, it doesn't feel like all that attention to detail about particulates in water and what underwater looks like, and, you know, the actor acting underwater. It just becomes a bit more of a Marvel crazy film.
Yeah.
You know. And I think my point there really, Hugo, is again the reel shown at the bake-off identified all these things that they were intending to do, and they did. I mean, clearly they did them, but that's what the people at the bake-off responded to. And we'll talk about a few of those as we go through the sequences. But yeah, here's what I think is happening with us. We know the visual effects in this film is amazing. We just can't pinpoint why it's not resonating like it often does on so many of these big films.
Unfortunately, I think there's one. I feel like there's one problem. Like, the water does look amazing, freaking amazing and stunning. Unfortunately, it came out on the same year of Avatar, so it's a bit tricky. You look at Avatar and you're like, oh, okay. It's very different, of course. One is like surface water. The other one is really deep underwater. Like, it's very different looks. It is completely, because they're so deep into the ocean on this film. It's a great segue because you were talking about the underwater scenes. I guess that let's just start with that, because I'm assuming you're talking about the Talokan scene, the Talokan sequence, the entire sequence.
Yeah, that's actually quite a huge sequence. Yeah. Generally, the visual effects for that were crafted by WetaFX.
Yeah.
But, of course, they came in and used a lot of their water development for Avatar, but to create quite a different look. But before Weta even did any of that post work, I thought, Hugo, there was a relatively interesting approach to doing underwater scenes here. We know for other underwater shows, Aquaman and Avatar itself, that there's lots of ways you can film it. You can film actors underwater.
Yeah.
You know, you can do that. You can film dry for wet, which is basically filming them on dry sets and then adding in moving hair, simulated hair, particulates.
Yeah, like Aquaman. They did that a lot over there. Yeah.
A lot of that. And, you know, there are just other ways you can do it by combining both. Here, what was interesting was that I guess they knew the limitations of shooting with actual actors, also with stunt actors, time limitations, budget, you know, dramatic lighting for what is effectively a world under there. They kind of had a general approach of shooting as much wet for wet as possible, but more as reference and as training for the actors, I think is one of the points that Jeff Bauman made, which is get the actors and stunt performers to do it wet, film it, but then replicate it again in a dry set, either blue screen or partial sets, so that they might have some sort of muscle memory of how it feels to be in water. You know, for people listening on audio, I'm acting underwater right now, and I think that sort of makes it's kind of it's a good idea, and I think those kind of things were convincing.
Yeah, it's an excellent idea. It's actually, I was really surprised by it when I watched the featurette on YouTube about that, and also like the interview you had on before and afters. I feel like it's really simple, and we always talk about this. Oh yeah, we need to shoot as much reference as possible, but this idea, because you know, not everyone has the time. Like you know, James Cameron had a long time to do Avatar. They worked on it for a long time. Not everyone has a budget like that. Not everyone has that amount of time to do stuff like this. So training all these actors to be underwater and do all that stuff, probably the technology wasn't even the same. Like they didn't even have the same kind of tracking capabilities. I felt like this was a great way of doing it, and also the actors that way they can feel the same way how they move, and there's a lot of really nice footage, including even when they're holding on whales. They even shot that. They shot like some stuff of them holding something with wires and actually moving through water so they could feel how that would look. That was excellent reference for CG as well. So I felt this was a great idea, really. And it was really convincing. I know there's a lot of CG on these shots, but the dry for wet looks really good. Like I was surprised when I saw the behind the scenes. I thought that they shot it underwater, so it was really good.
The dry for wet was amazing. I bet, Hugo, if we studied WetaFX's reel, if they're ever allowed to release one for this film in a you know, one of all their work, we might be blown away by how many of the underwater Talokan people are CG, even up close. Because, you know, we know that WetaFX can do that. So, of course, they've shot what they can, wet for wet and dry for wet. But I think WetaFX did a stellar job of animating and bringing to life underwater people. And as I found out in my chat with their VFX supervisor, Chris White, corn for the Talokan underwater scenes. I mean, it just turned out to be this huge project for WetaFX because, of course, we've got corn moving in the water. And so I thought that was
it's a beautiful
interesting.
set. It's a beautiful environment that they've built. It's an amazing environment with the sun and the entire building structures and, of course, the corn, like you said, and all the people flying around, swimming around, all the people swimming around, and it's just a beautiful set. I'm going to pick up one thing that you said about the digi-doubles, and yes, I know what you mean. I think people would be surprised by the amount of digi-doubles that probably is on this film. And I think, I have a feeling, maybe if someone who worked on the film wants to collaborate that on the comments, go ahead. I have a feeling that's why I'm disconnected with certain shots. I feel that we've reached the point now that digital doubles are actually better than the actual shot. Because if you think about it, like if you shoot an actor for real on a set with wires, with no real water there, or even flying in the air like Namor is, flying in the air, he's not actually in the air, there's no wind resistance, there's nothing. He looks like he's standing with wires in the middle of the air. That's how he looks. And if he's underwater, he looks like he's underwater inside a pool. He's never going to really look like he's actually on those places. Now, a digital double will, because the digital double will have all the physics and simulations of the water, the air, the actual, every single thing will be correct. And so if they nail the digital double and then they have all this simulation on top, I have a feeling the digital doubles now look better than the actual actor, because in that, I think that's why I have this disconnection, because I think when we just have the actor with the waist up, just him for real there, it looks different from the digital double. Not that it looks worse, it's just that digital double looks more real because it's an actual simulation, an accurate simulation of where he should be. So I wouldn't be surprised that this will happen more and more, where we have complete replacement and the actors only act it for it to become part of the animation later, because it does make sense. I mean, you look at Avatar, that's what they did on Avatar. They don't have anyone there for real except the strap, I know, but you know, like it's it's kind of where it's heading, really, because you cannot film it for real.
That's a good point, and I'm sure I've done an interview about a different film that involved digi-doubles, where the director is like criticizing the digi-double, and of course it's the real actor, and then vice versa, right? They're criticizing the real actor's performance, and the VFX soup goes, well, we took it over completely.
What Time to Live, because it's reaching to that phase, isn't it? It's amazing.
Yeah, and part of it is, Hugo, it's about our observation on reality. If you're not a diver, and I'm not, I mean, if you're not a big swimmer, I'm not sure I do know exactly what people look like underwater. And of course, no one knows, because we don't live underwater.
You assume,
so that must always be a creative challenge for the visual effects teams.
Yeah.
To like, well, we need to make this look real, but what is real for an underwater existence? Yeah. You know, so...
One thing to just to add and to wrap up this sequence of the telecon, there's one thing that people maybe not aware of it. You know, obviously, if they read your interview on Before and Afters, they'll be aware, but they're probably not aware of the amount of stuff that is actually on top of the real plate. It's really, really outstanding, because, you know, for certain shots where we did the dry for wet, of course, the actor is there acting, pretending that he's underwater, but then there's an entire takeover of CG adding to the actor that people might not be aware. You know, I'm talking about, like, they have to, of course, like you said, put the CG hair. But then they have the CG props, the necklaces and all the feathers and all the helmets. All of them have to float a little bit and actually flow with the water, especially the necklaces. If they had necklaces there on the actual actor, they had to remove those necklaces and put the CG ones. So now you're talking about roto painting, adding the CG on top, together and completely merged with the real one. It's really seamless. And then, of course, especially for the throne scene, where you have Namor coming down on the throne, and then in front of him you have all his subjects and everyone is looking at him. There's also like a mix of a bunch of them that are fully digital, and some of them are actually shot on a blue screen and integrated as cards there. Others are actually takeovers from complete CG. It's really complex. This sequence is really, really complex. It's not at all full CG. It's not. It's like a really amazing mix of everything going together. Props to Weta. This amazing, stellar work that they've done here, you know.
It is incredible. There's also all the particulates and the lighting effects, bokeh, and turbidity in the water. So, yeah, awesome job. And I kind of, like I said before, I reckon I could watch just a film of those eerie kind of scenes that I felt like something bad was about to happen to Shuri from Namor. But, you know, it does set up the next sequence, Hugo, which is the attack on Wakanda City, launched by the Talokan against the Wakandians. What did you think of that sequence just from a visual effects point of view?
Yeah, so this sequence is also breathtaking. I'm assuming, maybe correct me if I'm wrong. This is from ILM, right? This entire
this
section.
Would be mostly ILM. Doing that ILM. Sequence.
This sequence looks amazing. I love the hydro bombs. I love this entire flooding that happens. It is really powerful. I feel like this sequence. This is the one that I feel like it overstays its welcome, and I feel like it's a bit too much of flying around, and it's a bit too much of these like really crazy camera moves. So would have been nice if it would have been toned down a little bit on this sequence, and especially those close-ups of him flying around. I have a little bit of a problem with Namor flying around because he looks a bit weird sometimes. But the entire flooding and the entire water simulation is really impressive, and we've learned from the Visual Effects Society showreel. This thing is really powerful. Like these simulations, especially the hydro bombs, they're supposed to be 70 feet long, and they're supposed to have 200k gallons of water. It's insane. It's absolutely insane, and it's really beautiful. Although not connected to reality at all. They tested real water bombs, and it didn't really look. It was just a spray of water, so they had to kind of like come up with something that looked believable but completely impossible. But it's really, really, really cool. I liked it a lot.
Yeah.
But you saw even more than me, so you saw more breakdowns, so you probably even know more than me about it.
Yeah, actually two things about this sequence were in the Bake Off breakdown that made the crowd ooh and ah. And one of them first was that flooding that happens. You know, the special effects supervisor was testing the flooding on maquettes, like miniatures, before doing full-scale flooding. I think people love the idea that there's maquettes and miniatures involved somehow. And then they also love the idea that there's full-scale flooding. Now, apparently the full-scale flooding wasn't employed in the way that it had actually been built, and I think that was for safety reasons and whatnot, and realizing perhaps they needed to control it. But, you know, at least having that real water ready to go and interacting with stunt actors and actors in the scene is helping ILM do its major simulations. You could really feel that in the final shots, I thought, Hugo.
Yeah.
The second thing in the reel was like a really cool thing for me in particular, because I talked to ILM about the sequence, and one thing they mentioned was about Namor's flying. Now, I know you've got some issues with that, Hugo, but people liked seeing it. You know, that's kind of one of those things in the movie.
Superman moment, yeah.
Yeah, Marvel knows that people want to see him fly with his wings on his ankles, right? But they mentioned that they did a simulation in Maya with him on top of a helicopter, you know, which could do certain darting kind of moves. And I thought, oh, that's cool. And then in the Bake Off reel, there's the simulation of Namor on the helicopter. I'm like, oh my God, that's so cool. So I hope that gets released widely somehow. But that was actually pretty cool. So, okay, let's talk about the flying. I think at one point...
Before you go to the flying, there's one last thing I wanted to just say about the simulation.
Yeah, go.
There's two little small things I wanted to convey. One of the things, I think it looks so good because they actually had a real nice set there. They had really a lot of construction set.
Yes.
And a lot of actual water in the flood and on the...
Exactly.
They actually had a lot of water there. They actually shot a lot of shots where... Especially this shot with the kid that is being saved in the middle. You see a lot of water on the floor, and then, of course, they added all this CG water. it's really smart the way that they've actually went on to do this water. They did like these 2 layered systems where they had like a low resolution just so they could nail the animation and the movement. And then they just iterated on that, iterated. And then finally, when they got like some kind of approval, then they would actually go to the final render with all the detail. And the whole thing was really smart. They had like 5 main layers to do this water in compositing and also in CG out AOVs. They had like basically the water surface, which was basically a mesh for the water surface. Then they had, of course, all the articulates and all the bubbles and all the little small, minute little floaters that go on water. Then they had, of course, the spray of the water, the white foaming of all the water, and then, of course, the volumetric mist. So having all these controlled layers together in compositing, and then, of course, on top of the plate, the real plate, really gave them a lot of control to try to really tone down one layer and the other and put a little more, a little less, so they could really mimic and match the real water that was there. And I thought this was a really clever way of saving some render time and also giving a lot of flexibility in comp to try to get this water to look good. And that's why it's seamless. You look at it and it's like, I can't tell on some shots. I actually thought some shots were actually real water, and others, some shots that I thought were CG turned out to be real water when I saw the breakdown, and some shots that I thought were real water turned out to be CG, and I was like completely confused when I saw the breakdown. It was like, oh, okay, I was really wrong here. It's really seamless, you know.
I think ILM stepped up to the plate in a huge way with these water sims, and partly it's because there's so many different types of water. You know, it's not just one big wave crashing. And then it's the hydro bomb simulations as well, which of course a couple of the vendors had to deal with. But that also had that thing, well, we've never really seen a ball this size explode with that much water. What does that look like in reality, even though it wouldn't be reality? So they did a killer job. The other thing about the water that I really, really loved was that it often looked a bit messy, like washing over camera, or it was a bit whited out. And that is more like what you would do if you were filming water. It'd be messy. And I thought that was a really good addition to that scene.
That gives me that's a really good segue. I want to just give a little shout out to the DOP. The DOP, which is she's called Atom Durald. I'm hoping I'm not butchering her name. I'm sorry if I am. But she did an amazing job, I think, selling these shots, like you said, with the water hitting the lens and the wideness of it. It was anamorphic as well. It was really beautiful lensing choices. It really, and even you see it on the interviews, the visual effects supervisors on your interviews are always saying that they picked up the lensing choices from her, from what, even when they did the entire underwater sequence, which wasn't shot, it was full CG, they still kept the language that she established on the film. I'm really looking forward to seeing more films from her. You know, she's pretty young and she's done a lot of short films. She did this beautiful documentary from Spike Jonze, Beastie Boy Story, which is an amazing documentary. Really tell everyone to go watch it. It's such a good documentary. And of course, she did some episodes on Loki as well. So she's not foreigner to Marvel, of course, because she's worked in Loki as well. I don't know which episode she did, but I'm really looking forward to seeing more from her because it was. I thought the photography was beautiful, and especially on the beginning, on the funeral. I know I'm deviating from VFX, but on the funeral and all those dances, and then the coffin going, it was so beautifully shot. Very, very beautifully shot.
Definitely. So, and we always should mention that really the visual effects teams are placing their sequences into an already established look and feel of the film. And here Autumn did an awesome job too.
She did, and she's only 43, man. I can't wait to see what she's going to come up with next because she's very talented. So it's definitely a new wave of DOPs coming in now, which is great. But anyway, sorry to interrupt.
No. I think we covered the Sims.
It reminded me because of all that water coming into the lens.
We've covered the Sims. Then we really do, in this sequence, hit some Marvel-level craziness, which is Namor. flying around and doing things. You just have to expect it. It just had to happen, right?
There's so many other ways of doing it. It doesn't need. It's like the other Black Panther. The Black Panther ending when they're falling through the cave. It looks like a PlayStation game sometimes. Nothing to do with the VFX quality. It's the staging. It's the shot design that is a bit weird. I don't buy it. I just feel like there was other ways. We're not here to talk about that. We're talking about the VFX. So let's go with that.
Probably, therefore, it makes it hard for the visual effects teams to replicate reality and keep it physically plausible, given the moves that he has to make as a flying,
with the
water
little wings.
Yeah, but he flies in the water and he flies in the sky.
Yeah,
I mean that's a tricky character to pull off, basically.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, but I did, as I mentioned, love the helicopter sim in Maya. I'm still thinking about it to this day. I don't know why, but it just is sounds like a cool task for a VFX artist to be given, right? So, anyway.
No, but this entire thing, as I discovered from your brilliant interview on Before and After's website, this was actually a mix of a lot of things. They had shots on wires, they had turning forks, they had boxes, they had just him standing there, they had full CG versions of it. It was really a mix of a lot of different techniques to make something like this. So it was really cool.
Yeah, and back to a point you made before, Hugo, which is occasionally in some of these films now, you can tell when they've put the actor up on a tuning fork or on wires. By having a mix of techniques here, maybe the idea was to avoid that a little bit for Namor. But I think also the soup there mentioned that there was a costume change and also he was doing dramatic things. So basically, mostly below his waist is replaced, which no one will be surprised to hear that in a Marvel film, actually, these days.
Well, it's because when you're in the turning fork, your legs become nimble. It became with no strength. So I feel if he had those wings, you would have had lift on the legs, and he couldn't really do that as an actor. It's funny that you're saying about the CG replacement on the bottom. I'm going to say something that might be a little controversial, but I don't know if you noticed, at the time when the film came out, there was a lot of before and after shots of the real plate of Namor on the set and then the final CG version. And there was a lot of people comparing that then when they made the CG version of Namor, his crouch was much smaller. There was an entire conversation on this on
saw
Twitter.
That. But
you saw that? It was an entire discussion.
Sure.
No. I'm not here. I don't even know if it's true. I just find it fascinating that this is what Twitter does. People are obsessed.
I'm not surprised at all.
I am really, guys, come on. Have you seen? Is this what you're gonna want to talk about the film? It's about this? I thought it was fascinating that we had thousands and thousands of retweets, people discussing if it was true, if it wasn't true. Some people saying it was faked, that it wasn't. Of course, there's no official behind the scenes, so you can't even know if that's true or not. It is just ridiculous, the whole thing.
Well,
I thought it fascinating. I had to say it.
Yeah. Hugo, are you going to call this chapter Namor's Package? I can't believe I went there.
Of course, there was an entire conspiracy theory that they were doing this because of Disney Plus. They had to not. It was just so strange. It was so strange, the whole thing.
But the truth is, they do all kinds of fixes, costume fixes, wigs, wire removals, all the time. And the point is, it's meant to be invisible. And there's a lot of people out there comparing trailer to final shots these days, as I'm sure we've done on this podcast. But yeah, we should move on to the...
But there's one thing about this, about him flying, that I wanted to mention, because it's from your interview, and I thought it was one of the most fascinating things on your interview that I've never thought about ever. And it's this scanning of the actors that they start not looking exactly like the scan. I never thought about this. I thought this was brilliant that it was discussed on your interview. Wasn't it like he was explaining that, they scan the actor, he's muscled up at that time, but then of course he never again matches exactly the same muscular. It was really interesting.
Yeah.
I never even thought about this.
Well, it just so happens I did another interview on Black Adam, about The Rock with Digital Domain, who had a similar experience. And when you think about it, Hugo, I actually think it makes complete sense. Making these films, they require so much visual effects CG work. So, of course, you scan the actor while they're probably in training or bulking up or bulking down, whatever it is.
Prime. Yeah.
Then, often on set, there's a scanning booth and the actor is required to, be in costume then and get scanned. Then, they might break for Christmas or something like that, right?
And you have a lot of cakes.
Or you might get sick and, lose weight, that sort of thing. And so I think it must be common that they have these cyber scans of these actors that are slightly different proportions.
Yeah.
And then what are you building your digi-double to? Is an actor at the beginning of production, middle, end? And then if it has to be pixel perfect for tracking or replacement or extensions, that must be tricky for all these visual effects studios.
Yeah.
So, right. It was a really interesting point.
And I thought it was great, yeah. But of course, the visual effects supervisor was very polite, and he said that, of course, that the actor was amazing. He looked exactly the same. I don't know if it's completely true, but it felt like it was really nice that at least he was always in shape, and he was always kind of similar. At least that's what he said. Shout out to the entire. This was scanned by a company called Clear Angle, with some help of Scannable as well. They, as always on Marvel, they scan everyone on a film. But I thought it was an interesting little touch on your interview, and I had to mention it because it was just so interesting. But I'm not going to interrupt you again. Move on.
No. You didn't interrupt me. And I'm so glad you brought it up. There is such an awesome, by the way, community of scanning companies out there. I mean, I couldn't mention all of them. Clear Angle does a lot for Marvel, Scannable, Gentle Giant, IC, VFX. I mean, it's just, the list is a bit endless at the moment because there are so many big productions that need these actor scans. I've even been scanned by Pixel Light Effects, and I just really enjoyed the process. And I think actors also enjoy the process.
Oh yeah,
I might link to the article I did, a couple of articles I've done where I pinpointed actors taking selfies of themselves inside photogrammetry booths.
Of course, I've done
They're
that as well.
They're obsessed with it, actually. As am probably I.
Everyone does an Instagram post. When I was a few years ago, when I was on the scanning booth of PlayStation San Diego, I did a post as well.
Everyone does it.
Everyone does that. It's so lovely to be there. No, as always, these films have so many companies. We never get to talk about all of them. I apologize in advance for that, of course. But this film it has so many sequences, so many vendors.
Yeah. All right. The next big sequence we want to talk about, Hugo, is obviously this big Talokan Wakanda battle on that crazy ship. With what seemed like to be in the middle of the ocean for some reason. I don't even want to try and get the story point right for this.
It's a bit weird. I know, it's a bit
and
weird.
It's all to try and capture Namor with heat inside the ship. But one of the things that's interesting about this from a visual effects point of view, Hugo, which a lot of people seem to identify because this rogue image of the shoot appeared on Reddit a couple of months after the film came out, was that here we're talking about a lot of blue make-upped actors playing Talokan performers, Talokan people, and shot against blue screen. Now,
it's hilarious, that image.
It's a pretty funny thing to think about. But we all know that so much is done with brilliant keying these days and brilliant rotoscoping, right? So it's never really a big problem.
No, this is a huge misconception. People think that everything is keyed, and I can tell you that is almost nothing. Every single thing is rotoscoped. It ends up always being rotoscoped. It's already in the budget. It's already allocated. And this is not just for films. We do this in commercials. We did this on cinematics. We do this on everything. There's always like an allocation for rotoscoping, and you try to shoot as best as you can. And to be honest, like, yes, they are blue, but it's not the same blue. Of course, you can still separate for rotoscoping. You're going to roto anyway. Of course, the advantage of having it in blue is at least they don't get spill of green, because if it was green screen, they would have green spill on the blue. That would have been a lot harder to paint than actually just roto.
Yeah.
Because, of course, now it's blue against blue, so it's blue. It's always going to look fine. So I can understand, some companies, for example, even choose to put gray. Sometimes they put other colors, but it's of course it becomes, I think for the untried eye or for people that don't work in industry, they really flip out. A few years ago, this happened with Guardian of the Galaxy as well, where you had this really famous photo of just the whole set being blue, and then this character, one of the characters is completely blue, the guy with the can't remember his name. There's one that is completely blue as well, and so it was the same thing. Everyone just went bananas on social media as well because of this.
But ultimately, Digital Domain, who worked on this sequence, and also WetaFX did a few below the sea line parts of this sequence. They just had a huge task, really, in this sequence, because not only were they filling out the environment, which was the ocean, they were filling out the ship surface, which the fight was happening on the side of it, on the top of it. They were also basically match moving all those extra details, the breathers on the Talican and bits of clothing and all that sort of thing. I mean, I think some of the performers wore some sort of tracking apparatus to help, and then of course there's digi-doubles for the Talican and Wakandans as well. Then it launches into the Iron Man side of the sequence and also Black Panther jumping around. So it is a huge sequence that Digital Domain handled, did very well. My issue, as I mentioned earlier, is that it's just one of these crazy third act battles which seems like it just goes on, and of course this battle just ends because there's a bit of a treaty. But I don't know. What else do you think about the visual effects there, Hugo?
Yeah, but it's a bit. I understand what you mean. It's a bit confusing because there's a moment where they're almost winning, and then suddenly cuts, and they're losing, and then it cuts, they're winning again. And it's a bit. It kind of feels a bit like uneven editing on that sequence. It kind of looks like there was probably reshoots and re-editing, probably to try to make the film shorter, because the film is already 2 hours and 45 minutes. So that sequence probably was even longer. But yeah, in terms of the visual effects, I felt like the water looks absolutely stunning. The water looks
great.
Looks great. The digi-doubles as well, when they were fighting on the deck, because they actually had a piece of the set. They had a part of the ship, not all of it, but just a little piece. And so the turnover between digi-doubles and the real stuntman there was really seamless. It looks really good. Amazing work from Digital Domain. For me, like the few moments that kind of like didn't really work for me don't really have to do with the VFX. It's more like because it's not a believable shot, all that flying with the Iron Man and certain crazy angles and certain camera moves. I'm just not used to this anymore. I feel like I thought that we were moving on from this crazy camera floating around thing that we used to have in the 2000s and late 2010s. And it's just a bit of a shame that it's not a bit more grounded and a bit more realistic and a bit more like it was actually shot by a cameraman. It felt to me like sometimes it goes a bit off rails, especially with all the flying. And it's a shame because it makes the entire sequence lose a bit of steam, I feel. But I truly love certain part. Like, I really like the fight with Black Panther and Namor as well. That fight on the beach is really powerful. Some really nice shots there as well. But yeah, it's a massive shot. Apparently, according to your interview, there's 115 digital doubles, which is insane.
Yeah,
it's
insane.
That entire sequence is a film on itself.
Yeah. Two things I want to say about it is a special shout out here to the stunt performers.
Yeah.
Now, if you've got time, and I won't be able to link to all of them, try and go down the rabbit hole of finding a stunt performer from that sequence on Instagram, and then looking at their behind-the-scenes photos and videos that they're sharing on Instagram and Twitter and elsewhere. And then they often tag other stunt performers, and then you'll go to their Instagram page. And I have to say, Hugo, it's a pretty interesting world, stunt performing at the moment, in terms of sharing behind-the-scenes stuff from films that the visual effects crew is not allowed to share. And so there's some incredible behind the scenes you can often find from the stunt performers who perform on green screen or blue screen or, virtual production sets.
So I have something to. I have one little scoop to tell you about this. So I've actually talked with stunt performers about this. Stunt performers that worked on big films. I'm not going to name them because I don't want to flag them. But I've actually talked about this to them. I've asked them, why do they are allowed to post so much? Because sometimes
I'm not sure they are allowed.
Yeah, exactly. That's the thing. Because in this situation, they're posting blue screens and posting things that clearly the VFX companies were not allowed to show even.
Yeah.
And they always answer me. I've talked with 3 different people now, people that worked specifically in film. They always tell me the same. Oh, what do you mean? I just posted it. They don't even think about asking permission. They just post them. I'm not saying this happened with these stunt performers, of course, but I'm just saying that the people that I've asked and talked with told me that this isn't an issue. And I guess the studio doesn't care because they never tell them anything either.
Well,
so
it's always good news story because it shows that they were trying to make these sequences for real with real performers and not digi-doubles. And often it's reference for digi-double action. So I guess in that way it's a good news story. The challenge would be if they revealed a plot point early.
I think that doesn't happen. Yeah. They themselves probably prevent from doing that.
They often do it after the release of the film.
The
reason I bring it up, Hugo, is I'm kind of jealous of what they're able to show that I can't always get access to.
But it's funny that you're saying this because it's true. Like, the studios probably don't care because, like you said, it's so fashionable to say that it was all real right now. If a VFX artist would have shared a pre-render or a pre-version of a render of Wakanda, you would have been fired. That's the different thing. And this is, of course, an issue on itself. We're not going to discuss this now. This is a problem of itself. This is a problem of the lack of power that VFX artists right now have in the industry. And really, I personally, that's just my opinion. Personally, I feel that's the lack of having proper unionization and proper power behind us to actually have a bit more say on these things. And I feel like we're a long way from that. And they are not. They have unions, they are organized, they are in a different side of the set.
True.
They're also part from the set. The set is a different world. It's a different ball altogether, I feel like, and like we've mentioned, it's fashionable right now. The studios even embrace it, and they love it when it looks like it was all for real. That's the thing. They love that because they know that's going to resonate with people to go and watch the film, because then they're going to think it's all real, So
yes, you're absolutely right. The only other thing I want to say about this sequence is, I reckon I'm showing my non-Marvelness and lack of understanding. But when Shuri is fighting Namor and she gets the pole put through her stomach, I don't understand how she survived. Can you explain that to me right now, Hugo? Go.
I don't think you need to understand. What are you talking about? She's indestructible. No,
Is that how it works?
No, I'm sure there's some nanotechnology that goes into the body and rebuilds the organ, Man, come on. Let's be honest. The Wakanda technology is bonkers. The whole thing is bonkers. The whole thing is just the whole technology of those the little balls, the little beads that do everything. Like, answer me this: why did the queen die? It looked like it was fine. I mean, like she was just like in the water for a little bit. Like, why didn't she die and then Shuri didn't die? Like, there's no sense on any of this. Like, no sense. I'm sure it's a nanotechnology. I'm sure.
Yeah. While we're talking about that, I had this thing. I was sitting next to a friend watching the film in the cinema, and I was convinced the big twist was that the Queen was actually one of the Talokan, and that she'd gone, and when she went underwater, she'd be able to breathe, and everything would be okay, right?
Oh,
that would have been such a cool twist, Hugo, wouldn't it? Don't you reckon?
Yeah, fuck. They should hire you to write this.
I know.
It's so good. That's a really great idea. That's a great idea. I'm not kidding, man. I'm not joking. That's a fantastic idea. I felt it was a bit weird that she died. To be honest, like I don't feel like it needed to happen, but like that's fine.
I thought she'd prefaced it because she kind of hinted to Shuri that Chadwick had not said something to her. He'd kept something from her, and I thought that was it, but it turned out to be his son.
Well, I thought that too, but then I watched it again yesterday, and there's a problem there because, yes, she says, "I need to tell you something," and we all think it's the kid, right? On the beginning, on the forest, when she's on the forest with Shuri. But then when she meets the mother, I can't remember her name, when she meets her in Haiti, she says to her, "You didn't went to the funeral. I haven't seen you in 6 years." So she didn't know about the kid then? Like, I'm a bit like, okay, did she not? Is this a plot hole? I don't know. They should hire us as writers on this.
Yeah. But then, just back to the pole through Shuri's stomach. Can you explain that again, Hugo?
So Tony Stark has technology for this, okay? Tony Stark solved all of this on the other Iron Man. Haven't you watched them? Come on. Okay. Haven't you watched it? It makes no freaking sense. Yeah. Come on.
All right, we should wrap this up, but I just want to do 2 quick shout-outs to some other sequences. Of course, this is a Marvel film where there's multiple vendors involved, and we've really only talked about 3 of the major ones. Cinesite was responsible for that bridge sequence that we mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
And there's some very neat car, motorcycle action there that I thought was good, plus a hydro bomb in slow motion, which is beautiful.
That shot is magnificent.
Yeah.
It's a really beautiful shot.
Yeah.
No, I'm glad I was going to mention it as well. I'm glad you did that. Didn't want to shout out that entire sequence, but not much has come out from it, so I haven't seen really a lot of breakdowns or anything about it, but that hydro shot is magnificent.
Yeah, really cool. And then I did an interview with the team at Perception about the closing titles. Now, Perception is one of those opening titles, closing titles, motion graphics companies doing lots of work for Marvel shows and films. And here, what was really interesting was that those closing titles were much more live action based.
Yeah.
And tying into Shuri's use of the birth death cloth.
Yeah.
Burial cloth, I suppose it is. And go to the interview at Befores and Afters. It's really fun to hear about them getting the same lens that Autumn had used, going up to the top of this mountain to shoot cloth and fire. And people just love filming things and playing with fire, so they certainly loved it. I thought that was really interesting what they had to do for those titles. That they also did a bunch of design work in the film as well, which is mentioned in the interview. Yeah. But I just wanted to shout out those 2 companies in particular, Hugo.
Yeah, no, that the end title is really different from the other end titles from Marvel. It usually is either a full CG or a maquette or animation ending. So it's really interesting that they did live action. It's really nice tricks there as well. They used Autumn's lens, but they also used like this really nice a tube macro lens as well to shooting some of them. I saw it on the pictures. I recognized it because I have that lens, and it's like a really, really long tube that you can do macro photography 1-to-1, like at millimeters of distance, and it has like a little LED on the top. It's a really nice lens, a really specialized lens for bug photography and wildlife photography. But yeah, it's really interesting. And also when I watched the ending, when I saw it for the first time, man, I thought it was just a CG thing that they've made or something.
I too.
I thought that was it, yeah.
Even when I had the interview lined up, I thought, oh, they're going to tell me about some amazing cloth simulation that they achieved. Nope, they shot it.
Yeah.
So
it's really cool. But, it goes back to the same... I keep saying this on the episode all the time. If you can shoot it for real, shoot it for real. Like, why not? It's a great motto, and it worked so nicely. It's really nice. It's really beautiful.
It does.
Beautiful sequence.
It really does. Yeah. Okay, well, I think we've covered most bases of this film, Hugo. Although we've probably left out so much that we'll have people screaming. If you worked on the film and you want to mention the sequence, please drop us a note or put a comment on the YouTube page. We'd love to hear from you. Hugo, it's been a lot of fun going back to Wakanda. I can see you're still underwater there. I hope you get out and
start swimming to the surface.
And I promise next episode, everybody, I'll fix up my lighting, and I feel like the camera might have been refocusing a bit during this session, so I apologize for that. But thanks so much, Hugo. Really fun to chat about the film.
Yeah, it was really nice. And thanks everyone for listening, and I'll see you all in the next one.
Bye.
Bye.